The January transfer window is now open, and across the next month or so, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of deals happening around the world, but which teams should sign what players? Well, today we're going to use Football Manager to find that out. We'll be looking at the Premier League clubs today, focusing on one player that every club should sign according to FM. Now, for this experiment, I have simulated 1 year into the future with an updated transfer database, so the likes of Evan Nilsson or at Bournemouth and whatnot. All the transfers that happened in the summer are already here, and we have the promoted teams like Ipswich into the Premier League. And if you actually have a look, there's already some shocks in this table. Leicester and Ipswich managing to survive, but also Tottenham Hotspur winning the title, 4 points ahead of Man City, Chelsea all the way down in 10th. There's a lot going on, and there's been a lot of transfer business too. So what we're going to do is work from a 20th place team, see who they signed in January, and then work our way up to see not just which teams players sign for a bit of fun, but also where FM deems them to be the weakest that they need to spend money to improve. So in this case, the team that finished in 20th place was Wolverhampton Wanderers, rock bottom of the Premier League, but who did they sign in the transfer window? Well, their most expensive signing was an English 22-year-old midfielder from the Championship. It was Hayden Hackney, picked up from Middlesbrough in the January window very early on for £15 million. Now, it doesn't really look like he did all that much. Seems to be a bit of a weird transfer, but maybe he's going to help them when they get down into the Championship. Either way, FM has decided that centre mid was an area that Wolves needed to improve in, but it wasn't the only one, because I believe Wolves have signed a centre-back in real life, and it seems like that is also where the game thinks Wolves need to improve. They spent around £10 million on a Ghanaian 30-year-old by the name of Alexander Djiku, who they have picked up from Fenerbahce out in Turkey, and again, he comes in and doesn't really help them out. Our 19th place team was Southampton, doing one position better than where they are in real life, but who did they pick up? Well, they signed Emmanuel Dennis for around £1 million. He had a great season for Watford a few years back, and I believe they picked him up here from Nottingham Forest. But their most expensive signing was Spanish forward Firmino, who was signed on the 5th of January, played 5 games after he came in, only scored 1 goal. It wasn't the most amazing season of all time, but he is who Southampton decided to spend their money on, clearly deeming that they needed a new striker. And in this simulation, the other relegated team was Crystal Palace, and they did spend some money in January. Their most expensive transfer was Dennis Mann, a Romanian international who they have signed from Parma out in Italy for £15 million, and he didn't do terribly after coming in. But they also clearly thought they were weak in the striker position, because they ended up buying a Slovakian international 25-year-old by the name of Robert Bozenic, who they have picked up from BVT, a club out in Portugal, Boa Vista I believe that is, for £7.5 million, comes in and plays 15 times, 13 starts, and only 3 goals. So I think they'll be better sticking with Jean-Philippe Mateta. But now we've got the relegation teams out the way, we're going to continue up the table, so apologies for anyone who's having to wait for their team all the way at the top. But if you do go on to enjoy this video, I really would appreciate the support of hitting the like button. This is a bit different to the kind of content we normally do, so let us know if you're interested in it and we can do more for other leagues and whatnot. Make sure you comment down below as well which transfer surprised you the most, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And for those interested, this Man City save was part of a rebuild that I did on my channel, and if you want to check out more FM content like that rebuild and plenty others, then you can find my channel linked in the description down below. But let's get back to the transfers for every Premier League club, and it's Fulham up next, who just missed out on relegation and made quite a few signings in January. The most expensive one I'm going to point out is Jason Knight, a Republic of Ireland international, 24 years of age, signed from Bristol City in the Championship. He joined for that pretty huge fee, rising to nearly 20 million, played twice off the bench, scored 1 goal, so when called upon did well, but wasn't called upon all that much. Oh, and they also signed Rob Holding too, going to Crystal Palace and paying around 5 million for the 29-year-old defender. Again though, they didn't really use him. Everton are up next, who decided to part ways with Sean Dyche and appoint Javi Gracia. But who did they bring in the transfer market? Former Celtic man Liam Labada signed pretty early in January. The right winger comes in from the MLS, where he'd been doing okay for Charlotte FC, actually doing very well for them. Then he came to Everton and again wasn't really used at all. The first signing though that I think's had a real impact in a team since signing in January was Everton's other big signing, who is Josh Doig, a Scottish international 23-year-old left back who they signed from Sassuolo. He played for the club for 1 season after signing in January, played pretty much every game, got 5 assists and a 7.1 average match rating. Probably the best signing we've seen so far from any club. Up next is Nottingham Forest, the club that's done very well in surviving in this FM world, but of course in real life is doing so well. Their big signing of the transfer window was a new striking option, picking up Joe Gelhardt. The 23-year-old Englishman signs from Leeds for a fee of around £10 million, played 6 times, got a pretty good average match rating, but didn't really contribute in the goals and assists. Perhaps Perhaps the best transfer of this whole video, in my opinion, though, was the only signing that Ipswich made in the transfer window. Remember, they survived and did so pretty comfortably, and maybe it was because of this signing. And that is Roberto Firmino, the former Liverpool man, signed for Ipswich on a free as an impact sub, supposedly, having left his deal out in Saudi Arabia. I don't know what had happened there. I have actually had a look, and he didn't play at all for Ipswich. Now, the reason being is he signed on the 2nd of February, I guess because he was a free agent, but for that reason, I guess he wasn't registered in time, didn't actually end up playing. So whilst it is my favourite transfer in terms of Firmino being at Ipswich, obviously, he didn't actually help the club at all. But just above them in the league was Leicester City, who managed to survive pretty comfortably in the end compared to where they are in real life, and they made a fair few signings in Jan. Let me run through them quickly. Firstly, they spent £1 million on a new centre-back called Chumi, followed it up by spending around £7 or £8 million on Depu, an Angolan striker who came into the club, ended up scoring twice all season. But they had two big signings in terms of a transfer value. The first one was Harry Darling, a 25-year-old centre-back, a position which clearly the game thinks Leicester needs to improve, with two centre-backs signed now. He cost nearly £10 million from Swansea and only played twice. But a player that came in and played pretty much every game after January was their other signing, another centre-back, Spanish 28-year-old Edgar, who they picked up from Almeria out in the second tier of Spain. He ended up joining for around £9 million, played 15 times, scored twice, and helped Leicester to safety. Up next was Brentford, who had a pretty quiet window, but did sign a very useful squad player. Thomas Frank decided to invest in Crystal Palace's Will Hughes, who has had a good season so far in real life for Palace. In this FM world, he leaves for $350k in January, having played pretty much the whole season before that January transfer, only to not really play too much at all at Brentford, but maybe he's one for next season. Up next was high-flying Bournemouth, sitting in 11th place in the Premier League. They made a few deals too, but the most expensive was a 23-year-old Spanish workhorse midfielder, Francho, who is brilliant in FM, and in this world, having moved from Zaragoza to Bournemouth, he ended up playing 12 times for the club after January, 9 off the bench and 3 starts, 1 assist, decent average match rating, nothing crazy, but that was who Bournemouth decided to bank their money on. Perhaps pretty surprisingly, one of the teams that spent the least in January was Chelsea, who only bought in one player, and much like the rumours seem to be in real life, Chelsea thought they needed a centre-back, so in this world they went out and signed Manu Silva and loaned him back out to the club that he was currently playing at, so I guess it's just one of those transfers I hope will make them profit in the future. £2 million loaned back out to Portugal, and maybe they'll try and flip him next season. West Ham finished in 9th place, and their transfer window was a pretty interesting one, because they went out and signed Malcolm, who was playing in Saudi Arabia. The Brazilian 28-year-old, much like Firmino, kind of gave up his contract over there, and for that reason was available on a free. He joined West Ham, ended up playing 4 matches for the club, 1 assist, only 1 start as well, and for the wages he's on, it's not exactly the best return. Then there's Aston Villa, who I'm sorry if there's any Aston Villa fans who have waited this long into the video, but they decided to sign nobody at all. Brighton finished in a 7th place European spot and only made 1 signing to get there, and I must say it's a pretty interesting one, not one I would have thought I'd seen, but they picked up Jed Spence on loan from Spurs in January, played him 4 times, and I guess he was just cover for maybe an injured player at fullback. Another one of a few clubs that decided not to sign anybody was Manchester United, who in this world ended up appointing Thomas Tuchel after sacking Erik ten Hag. He's known in game as Matthias Dahm if you don't have a name fix on, but he managed to guide the club to a 6th place finish with no signings at all. Mikel Arteta's Arsenal, though, were the biggest spenders of any club in the January window, making 2 major signings. Firstly, they spent £60 million on an alternative option to Bukayo Saka. Calvin Stengs was the option they went for. The 26-year-old Dutchman signed from Feyenoord for £53 million, rising to £62 million, only to play 4 times off the bench. But to provide some extra cover for Gabriel and Saliba, they also went out and signed Jonathan Tah. The 29-year-old German international came in for £30 million, and again had no real impact on the club at all, but I guess it would be pretty hard to break away that ideal defensive partnership that they've already got. Liverpool were another team that spent big in January to back up Arne Slot, who instead of finishing in the top position this season, finished in 4th. The first signing they made, and the cheapest of the 2, was Antonio Silva, a very good option for the future, 21-year-old Portuguese centre-back, signing for the club for £38 million from Benfica, where he played 6 times, 4 starts, and did well when called upon, so definitely want to help him out down the line. line. And it's clear that in this world, Trent wasn't seen as the right back they wanted long term because Wonderkids was signed, the 23-year-old Brazilian coming in from Monaco for 39 million, rising to 49 million, and he went on to play 10 games after January. Newcastle had a very interesting window though, bringing in 2 major signings to bolster their ranks. Perhaps the biggest coup of this whole video, they signed Theo Hernandez, one of the most sought after left backs in world football. The Frenchman joined the club for around £43 million, no additional fees, came in and was exceptional from minute one, having signed from AC Milan with a 7.36 average match rating, which I believe is the best performance of any player yet. But they actually spent a little bit more money on a new midfielder, spending 50 million on Steven Estuquao. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he's a Canadian midfielder who they have picked up for a major fee from FC Porto. Again though, comes in and plays very well for Newcastle. Moving on to Man City, and this one is a little bit of a cheat because technically I made this signing myself and it wasn't in January. This was the club I was actually rebuilding in this save, so it's kind of the only one that we don't get an accurate reflection of what the game thinks they want, but I decided to choose my own Rodri replacement in the summer window. I say Rodri replacement, it was more a Rodri deputy, so I ended up going for Samu, a Portuguese midfielder, 24-year-old coming in from Mallorca. We actually loaned him back out for the season to get a bit more development, but he cost 21 million quid, a release clause deal. I just felt like his attributes kind of suited what you would want from a backup to Rodri. Not so good that he'd want game time every single day of the week, but when Rodri was missing, he's hopefully going to come in and help the team out. So I thought it was a decent signing. But for our final team, the one that won the Premier League, we have Ange Postecoglou's Tottenham, who when you do use updated transfers, seem to do really well in this FM world. I'm not sure why. But in this save to secure the title, they felt they needed some better options on the wing, and they spent the majority of their budget on 22-year-old French midfielder Dylan Bakwa, signing from Strasbourg out in France where he did really well, made that £20 million move, nearly £30 million with add-ons, played 3 times off a bench, scored 1 goal, and looked pretty good when playing, so definitely one for the future. But there you go, that's the transfer business that every Premier League club made in January, according to FM. Obviously, just a little bit of fun. I'm not saying any of these deals will happen or they're right to happen. Some of them were pretty weird and wonderful transfers, I must say, but hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you have, let us know by smashing the like button and let us know what transfer was your favourite, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.